the room full of people and to have you all here. Again, it's also fantastic to welcome people who are joining us virtually online. I'm Scott Davis. I'm the founder and executive director of Medium Photo. And wanted to begin today's series of artist talks by acknowledging that we're broadcasting from the city of San Diego, which is the ancestral and current home of the Kumeyaay people. And I want to thank the Kumeyaay people for sharing this land and this space with us. Today we have a lot of events happening live here at the festival, including the opportunity to have your tintype made. The tintype artist does stereo tintypes as well. If you've never been shot in stereo, it's a great day to do that. We have a raffle that supports Medium Photo. We have a number of different items that we're raffling off, a series of books from Radius, a subscription to Aperture, camera bags from Think Tank Photo, a Medium membership, etc. So I'll begin doing drawings for those raffles at the 11 o'clock lecture with Don Bartletti. We have book signings at noon today. We have book signings with Stephen Berkman, with Michelle Dunmarsh, Don Bartletti, Amanda Marchand, and myself, because I have a book out now through Radius. And we also have a series of sponsors who are all here to help you stay connected to photography and to help feed your careers as photographers or non-photographers who will benefit from what they have to offer. So make sure to go ahead and check them out and make a new friend, meet people, and find contacts to support your career. Finally, I wanted to thank the City of San Diego Commission for Arts and Culture, who has generously supported the events of Medium Photo in 2022. Today's first talk is by Amanda Marchand, and Amanda is our Second Sight Award recipient. And how we choose the Second Sight Award recipients each year are from photographers who participate in the Medium Review. So all of our participating photographers are asked to nominate 3 artists who they met with, whose work and whose ability to talk about that work resonate in a way that really makes for compelling engagement. And so Amanda was selected from our 2021 virtual review, and she's here with us today from Brooklyn, where she's based, and will give us a talk about her work. So I want to welcome Amanda Marchand.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's wonderful to see you all here. I'd also like to thank Medium Photo, such a fantastic organization, and I've just had such incredible things happen from my review, and everything has gone so smoothly, and just such a wonderful extended photo family. And Scott Davis, thank you for everything you do. You're amazing. I'd also like to thank those who nominated me for this award. It's been really incredible to share the platform this year with all the other nominees who've given their talks and learn about their work. It's just so fantastic to be supported in this way as an artist, so I really appreciate it, and it's a great honor. I'm going to be talking to you today about 2 bodies of work. Lumen Notebook, which is work I've been making for the past 5 years, and towards the end I'll touch on briefly another body of work called This Earthen Door. Both of these works are cameraless works. I'm a photo-based artist with my early background in English literature, and photo books play a really large role in the work that I do. For about 2 decades, I've been experimenting with the medium of photography in many different ways, often asking the question, what is a photograph? What really drives my practice is experimentation and questions and sort of a curiosity of things unfolding unexpectedly. Lately, I've been working with ideas of presence and connection in my work. These have been really important to me of late. For several years, I've been fascinated by meditation, and I've begun incorporating it into my art practice, as I'll discuss. I'm going to tell you a little anecdote about a recent experience I had in the pandemic this winter related to this type of inward journey. So talking about January when winter was hitting New York City, and we had been really careful as a family with everything, and I was having the urge to travel, but we weren't traveling anywhere yet, and just feeling a little bit of I'd hit an existential wall. And so I decided, well, why not travel further inward? So I did something a little bit outside the box. I engaged a hypnotist to regress me and to travel back in time and see what I'd find and see what that would, bring up, and also curious about exploring that world of the psyche, as it's very important in what I draw on when I make work. Time travel is something I'm familiar with, as are all of you. We experience it every time we look at a photograph. So I underwent this hypnosis session, and I went back to early childhood and pre-language, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing here, but it was really fascinating and changed the way I am thinking about identity and time and just that inner world, that really open inner world that we don't always explore so deeply. But towards the end of the session, I met with a younger self, so a young child. And the question was, does she have anything to show you or tell you? And instantly, the answer appeared in her hands. There was a book, and it was glowing. And as I approached a little more, I could see that it was an open book. It seemed to be filled with light. And then as I got even closer, I could see that it wasn't just a book. It wasn't just glowing with light or filled with light. It was a book of light. And the reason I'm telling you this is because this is the way I've been working for the past 5 years, literally, with books and light. And so this symbol appeared for me, as, something to maybe figure out over time what it means, or just the path that I'm on. But it's also, interestingly, if you think about it, a definition of what a photograph is, in essence, a drawing or imprint made with light. All of the work I make is in concert with the natural world. I grew up every summer going to camp for a month, sleeping outside in a tent, and I do these long 2-week-long canoe trips every summer with family and friends in Canada, way out in the middle of nowhere, which are really incredible. And I also, in British Columbia in my 20s, I planted trees as a tree planter for several seasons, planted over 200,000 trees. So being in nature has really been essential in the way I move through the world, and something that's such an incredible place to be for me. So while I have photographed with a camera the landscape and in the landscape for many years, I was always interested in this intersection between the world outside and the inner world and where they meet. So I've been working cameraless for a little bit more than 5 years now. Lumen printing, which many of you will know as photographers, it's the sun printing process I've adopted. And it's allowed me to really slow down as an artist and engage more deeply with photography and the tools of its own making. What is a Lumenprint? For those of you who don't know, I think it's the simplest form of photography there is. You can do it with children. You take black and white photo paper, any kind, and you place it in the sun or in UV light. Excessive light brings out latent color in the paper. So it has this wonderful, flip where in the dark room it's black and white, but then if you bring it out into the world, it has this really incredible range of colors that shift. You can use current papers. I use current papers on the market now, and you can use expired papers, which I also use. I get them on eBay or friends give them to me, and older papers have a lot more silver in them, so you get quite dense or deeper colors, I find. And it's so simple that I'm just going to, oops, did that go? Sorry. Here, how do I play this? Will it just play? No. I don't know how to play it here. There we go, is a little video of what I'm actually doing, just to show the simplicity of it. That blue has been in the light for about half an hour, and then I'm just moving this book quickly over the two, and you can see the paper shifting color. And this is an example of the bottom piece of paper has been in the sun for an hour, and the top one just a few seconds. So there's actually alchemy happening because there's a tiny bit of developer in the surface of the paper. And depending on the paper brand you're using, this chemical concoction is a little bit different. And so there are different ranges. And I feel like every time I'm doing it, the paper's sort of shifting color like the colors in the landscape that you might watch if you're tuning into that. I've played with over 100 brands of photo paper now, and feel like every brand has its own color alphabet. This is an example of some tests where the dark areas have been in the light the longest, and the paper is usually white or cream or yellow colored when you start out, so you can see the differentiation. The title for all of my Lumen explorations is Lumen Notebook, the work I've been doing for 5 years. It uses this fugitive Lumen process to explore ideas around time, flux, and our mortal planet. At the heart of this work is The World is Astonishing with You in It, a 21st century field guide to the birds, ferns, and wildflowers. This is a series of images, and it's also an artist book, as well as a larger book that I'm still working on. This series of abstract birds, beak shapes, egg shapes, very brute, simplistic fern shapes, and flower shapes, points to large-scale change affecting the planet. Scientists posit that every day up to 150 species are lost right now, and that this could amount to as much as 10% a decade. In the World is Astonishing series, each of these abstract birds, ferns, and flowers is titled after flora and fauna on the endangered species list in North America. So I've been making this work at different residencies in nature and at my family's Canadian cabin, where the birds, ferns, and wildflowers abound. My summer studio there is in a really huge glade of ostrich ferns on a lake and surrounded by forests that just continues up north in the Laurentian mountain range in Canada. So it's very wild with moose and fox and deer and all kinds of wildlife. These field guides are drawings made with light paper and scissors. I'm making the sun prints using books to mark the pieces of paper with the edge of a book or with the spine of a book. Here you can see I've used the spine. just blocking the sunlight. And the 3 books I'm using are 3 vintage field guides, you can see here, that belong to my late mother. She used to use them as reference guides and also teach my children with them when they were together. In this series, I have a very strict set of rules, and I allow myself to make only 1 mark per piece of paper. So it might be a larger piece of photographic paper, but I'm cutting it and then use the book's edge to mark the paper once. And the scissors are also, in using the scissors to make the drawings so that each of these is, a final image is a collage. They're mounted off of a back and they have a bit of a, 3-dimensional presence to them. What I love about working this way with really simple tools and a very set vocabulary of what is allowed and is that I've been able to really expand upon the themes and ideas I'm interested in, and it's kind of, as an artist, just led me in these wonderful directions because the toolbox is so narrow that I have to sort of be creative with where everything goes. It's been really generative that way. And I'm just counting time in the sun with every piece of paper, marking the paper, marking time by the colors in the paper, really. This process has allowed for a focus on presence, with each collage being a small meditation. And here I've got, this is a humorous slide where I did a Google search for Spalding's catchfly, and my image came up on the web search, and it's just so abstract. I just thought this was kind of funny. So the meaning of the work is rooted in the process of making, in the transient nature of lumen color. Lumen color is altered when you fix it with chemistry. You can fix a lumen image, and many people do fix them, but what you'll see is that the colors really usually quite drastically shift from like pinks to burgundies or blues or browns, that lumen color is just really in a state of flux. So how have I been preserving the color? Early on, I just decided that I would use a scanner to scan the lumens because it was this element of color and time that really fascinated me and was relevant for my practice. So I like how the use of this tool expands the conversation I'm interested in about time, merging very early photo process with new technology. Also, interestingly, the scanner light continues to expose the image a tiny bit because there's a flatbed light passing over the image, the unfixed original lumen image. So the final image reflects a multifold process of making, both analog and digital, this 2-part process of making, scanning, printing, and recutting. So here I have, this is a mother-child diptych, 2 eggs that are above the stairs, and they show how sometimes I'm playing with the scanner in the making of the final images. This sun print was scanned twice here. So you have the bluer one on the right, the little one, and then the more purplish one having been scanned a second time on the left, also scanned at a larger DPI, which some of you may know means that the scanner moves very slowly so it gets blasted with light. And then they're printed at the resolutions that they, related resolutions, the 2 sizes here. And this is another one from the larger project, Lumen Notebook, that shows the scanner. It's called 139. I scanned the original lumen 9 times, and I'm showing 3 of them here. So as I alluded to a little bit in the beginning, books are really a big part of my practice and the way I make work. I publish at least 1 book with every project. Sometimes I'll do a kind of what I call a placeholder book, an artist's book, if I'm working on a bigger book. They're really a way that I conceive of work. They give me permission, or it's the way that I'll conceptualize a project, and then the project sort of makes sense to me suddenly through the book form. So for many reasons, books make a lot of sense for me. They're really intimate, and I like that about them. You can just hold them in your hand, and the nature of my work is often maybe a little bit of a slow burn or quiet, and so that I think makes sense as a form. Also, they have a long shelf life, longer than gallery shows, and their form is ever changing if you wish to engage them that way. Books can be a sculptural space. I'm going to show this video here. I'm worried about, how do I make it go? Okay, this is making my recent book, just little artist book that will be upstairs later. And books also have the element of time as you flip the pages, and my work really is, I'm always interested in time, and so I can play with that as I often work in sequence. And they have, if you wish to engage in this way, also a lovely tactile materiality with papers and all of those considerations. They're also a vehicle for text, and I have that background in writing, and text usually makes its way into my work in one way or another, so for me that's another bonus. But what I love most about books is they're just really a very difficult puzzle or conundrum to grapple with that I find very exciting, and sort of sometimes a love-hate relationship, but really for me it ends up being usually the way a project is conceived to begin with. So I published this little 5x7 artist book last year, edition of 50, and it sold out quickly, so I made a larger edition this year of 200. And the book is really just an invitation to delight. The actual book cover is an invitation card with metallic paper, and then this holographic text that shifts and echoes the Lumen process. The book comes out of the envelope, and on the right is a piece of unexposed photo paper. So it's a live lumen that's not fixed. It continues to change as you engage the book. And this is an example of it's been shown and what you may get, or you may get a different image if you sort of play with it in a different way. And then in the inside, there's just a page of text with the photo papers and the titles of the endangered species that are in the 8-fold book, these abstract flora and fauna. And then the book folds out into a 13 by 19 inch print on the back called Field, also made with one of the books. And then I thought I'd have some fun with the pricing, thinking about all the elements of the book. And so this is a tiered book, so it's 200, but there are these tiers and the price increases with each tier, the price or value, in the way that the species become more rare as the book runs out. The last 4 books come with a small collector's print, a tiny Lumen collage in this envelope. So there are 3 purple and 1 gold. There's the image Virginia goat's rue, disappearing species of flower. And the very last book is gold, and this one, the proceeds will be donated to a wildlife fund. So I'm still working on this larger book of all the endangered species in North America here. It's just my book dummy, little image of those. And because books are really integral to the way that I make and conceive of work, I have to talk about my collaborations with DATS Press in South Korea. They make the most exquisite artist books, somewhere between a trade book and an artist book, small print runs of about 300, with beautiful materials and incredible attention to detail. And they're just phenomenal to work with. They're so lovely and supportive and incredible. And they published this book, Night Garden, that's just sold out. And more recently, my book, Nothing Will Ever Be the Same Again, which is a book, it's an ode to winter, the changing season of winter. It's set in Finland using a camera here. But this is really when I began to think about using camera or using photography as a tool for meditation, a tool for presence, a tool for connection, to sort of merge what I was, how I was being in the world with being an artist and sort of bring them more closely together. And I started asking the question, is it possible to photograph nothing? So this book came out of that, and then was focused on the subtle shifts in the landscape. And the Lumen work, I feel, is very related to being in a state of sort of, for 1 month at a residency, in a state of deep presence with the landscape and all the colors in it. So while I was there, the book was being published, I was there for a 1 month long, and I moved to South Korea when the book was being made. I was invited to do a residency at the same time at Dat's Museum of Art. And I asked the members of the staff in the museum and those at the press if they would like to do a project with me. It was their 10-year anniversary, and they're also a 10 women strong group, which on the heels of the Me Too movement, I was just like, that's really incredible to see 10 women running this incredible museum and press. And so I asked them to bring me books of their favorite heroines, be they fictional or real. And they all brought me books. Some brought me more than one book. And I made a series of Lumenprints with each of these, with the books that they brought. And what was so fantastic was that there was a language barrier with Korean English. And many of them could speak a certain amount. Some were very proficient, but I was able to connect with them with their stories, with their family lives, and why they chose these books through both writing, translation, and get to know them a little bit more deeply. So this series is called No Title Required. This woman took her mother's diary. She was her heroine, and she brought her little diary, really just a diary of, a date and a note on every page, and I used that one for this one. This one, A Friend is a Soul in 5 Bodies. She actually, there were many books that were published, but this was another one where she took her 4 best friends. They had made a book together with little letters to each other, so I made that with her book. And then these were exhibited for their show, Synesthesia, The Space Between, at Dat's Museum of Art. They printed a Korean scroll, a book scroll, as part of their 10th anniversary, and showed the book that way, the books that way, the images of the books. So they've really been a big part. I've been publishing with them for about 8 years, and they also sometimes make parts of my books. They made the second printing of The World is Astonishing. They made the book insert and the folding and the printing for the second printing for me. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the larger work, the Lumen Notebook work. Traditionally, when you're making sun prints, you'll use, leaves or flowers or an object or transparency. And as you can see, I've been using only books for 5 years. I actually started out using photo envelopes and photo boxes where the paper, is stored to protect it. And then I quickly moved to books. I was interested in the idea of language being a catalyst for an image rather than the title coming second. So in a way, you could say this has been a type of writing project. So Lumen Notebook sources from many different books on nature, reference books, atlases, dictionaries, as well as other books that I'm using when I'm researching, or just, general books, and even some books that are a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Secrets of Six-Figure Women. So I've been in playful conversation with photo books also on the landscape and natural world. I'm still working on those a little bit. This image here, The Meadow, I used a Barbara Bosworth book, her book, The Meadow, just placed it on top. And I have some quick screen grabs here. I don't know how in focus they are, but I thought they'd help just sort of illustrate a little bit of the playful conversation that is happening. These books are really important to me, and so it's fun to be in conversation with them in different ways. This is an image called Sunburn. It uses Chris McCaw's book, Sunburn. Just stood it up on end, and it made this shape, and I hope this image isn't too terrible. It's not a great resolution, but you can just see the echo here of his incredible book and work. Really amazing work. So then there's this image here called Black Maps. I used David Meisel's book, Black Maps, relating to chemical leaching in the landscape, in the environment, these aerial views of the land. And actually, what happened here is I put the image outside, and at a busy period, obviously, I forgot about it for several weeks. And then I had a sudden realization. I went running out to get it. And the humidity and moisture had made this kind of pooling. So here's an image from his larger project, the Lake Project, that really feels like it echoes some of the work. I can go back here. But so there's so much serendipity in making these images, this Lumen printing. It's really a lot of just accident, fortune, not really having control. I do test the papers a bit, but I love that a lot of it is out of control, and it's all these chance compositions that happen. I did work with books for about 2 years. I worked, on the work that I call Lumen Notebook for about 2 years, not really sure if I would ever show them in any way or how they were going to, play into final work. And it wasn't until my show, I had a solo show at Trawick Contemporary in Berkeley last year, my gallery that I've been with for a very long time. And I realized that process had been so important with the Lumen work that I had stacks of books in my studio and apartment everywhere, and that I could display the work in these stacks, echoing this way that they are in real life. So again, being about process here. The stacks play with the serial nature in my work. I've always worked with serial diptychs and triptychs and multiples. Another through line in my work has been, it keeps showing up, this horizontal and vertical axis. I see these two lines as a kind of simplified syntax for the landscape, having photographed in the landscape for so long, just sort of reducing it to its essence. The horizon line and the verticals, trees generally, any vertical marker really. But I think of the horizon line as a line of time moving backwards and forwards, and the vertical, sort of metaphorically with Joseph Campbell and his work, talks about the axis mundi pole in all cultures, which is traditionally a maypole or a Christmas tree, but it's the thread that joins the heavens and the earth. Actually, early on, I did a whole project called 415514, camera-based, where I was really intrigued by the idea, by the horizon line and the way optically or with a camera you can photograph it, but it's not physically there. So I've been making Lumen test strips every time I go to a different residency or go up to Canada with all my boxes, just to sort of get to gauge what my color palettes are so that I can direct the work a little bit more like a painter might use their paints. And what I realized maybe about a year ago is that these test strips you see here, well, actually everyone except for the middle one there is a test strip, the two long ones and then the two bracketing. I was just doing these lines and that they spoke to ideas of time that were thematically really important to the work in a very simple way. This is a group show I was in at Institute for Contemporary Art in Maine called Parallax Geography, curated by Julie Potras Santos. So I realized that the test strips not only spoke about seconds, minutes, and longer chunks of time, but that they were also analogous to darkroom practice, just test strips in the darkroom in a really nice way. and that these were not intended to be final pieces. Again, they were just sort of these serendipitous pieces where there's no ego involved. So these are called timelines, and the timelines include these other test strips that when I went back, I was also just sort of randomly making test strips this way, these are made with envelopes, photo envelopes and boxes, so moving them on a diagonal. And these are called event horizons. And what I like about these, in contrast to the long, thin timelines, is that for me, they sort of point to think about time in another way, in like deep space time, and they sort of act as these portals. So nearing the end of talking about all of the Lumen work I've been doing, I'm bringing you back full circle to these Lumen Circles, which is really the genesis of how I found Lumen printing in the first place. I'd never heard of it. But it was 5 years ago and a new administration in the White House. And as you'll remember, it was fairly turbulent with a lot of divisiveness. And for me as an artist, it just felt like a new era had suddenly appeared. And I was wondering, like, how can I keep working in the same way that I've been working? And a lot of artists were echoing that. We were all sort of saying, do we continue making art? What do we do now? What do we do with this? And so with all the lines, the divisiveness, there's just, the turbulence, what I wanted to do was find a way of bringing people together where they weren't focusing on their differences, but in what we share in common, which seems like so much to me. And so I brought people together for a half-hour-long meditation circle, or circle of silence, where people are just invited to come sit on photosensitive paper. We're at the San Francisco Art Institute. These are about 11 by 11 feet. They're tiled pieces of 16 by 20 photo paper. And this is the first Lumen Circle I did. This is a detail from it. It started to sprinkle with rain at the very end, so you can see little specks on the paper. And this is the second one I did at the Hermitage Artist Retreat in Manasota Key, Florida. I was there as an artist in residence for a while, which is an amazing residency. You don't apply for it, and they just send you an envelope of sand and a note saying you have 6 weeks to use as you wish. So we had about more than 40 people for this one. It's a little bit bigger, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, and golf carts were involved, and the paper was rolled in blankets to keep it, safe from the sun until we rolled it out. This is the image that we made here. And then for every one of these, all the participants, if they want to, they sign their name on a piece of paper, and I send them a little postcard of the print with all the names of the participants on the back. So this is just what the postcard would look like if you saw both sides. And then the third one I did was in South Korea, for that artist residency at Dat's Museum of Art. Here we are just rolling it up after the exposure. This is the circle. They generally have lasted about 30 minutes, but it's really just dependent on how long people want to sit. And what's nice is that they can accommodate a large number. People can raise their hand and swap out after 5 minutes, or they can sit for the duration. So it's really just to be silent and sit together and mark our time together on the planet. And so this is here on the right, you see a door is the photo studio that I was using, and it's on a mountain, and it's very bucolic. It's a really incredible place. And this is the third one, exhibited at Dat's Museum of Art, and that shows synesthesia. So that's pretty much it for the Lumen work. I'm jumping over to recent pandemic work that I've been working on that's still work in progress very much. It's a collaboration with my friend Leah Sobsey, who lives in North Carolina. She works with alternative processes in photography like me, and she works with collections. So about 6 months into the pandemic, feeling really isolated and working from home so much, we decided to collaborate together. So that's been a phenomenal thing, to just be working in tandem with somebody else through this pandemic on ideas and getting together at small points to push the project forward when we need to. This work is called This Earthen Door. We were both smitten with Emily Dickinson's Herbarium. It was almost instantaneous, a very short conversation. We just decided that we had to work on this project together. We were both really excited about it. Her Herbarium is a flower sampler that she put together as a young girl, finished at the age of 14. And it's the forgotten treasure at the intersection of poetry and science. It's really exquisitely put together with such fine detail, her handwriting, little clips of the paper being cut and labeling. But she did it as a girl, so there's some mistakes, some labels that are wrong in the book. But unlike other samplers of the period, if you look at some of them, they may be more scientific, but they're maybe more messy and not quite so delicately and thoughtfully put together. So it's put together with 424 different plant specimens. This is page 1 of her book. So our project, This Earthen Door, is a remaking of Dickinson's Herbarium using the anthotype process. Anthotypes just mean plant-based photo process. So we're using plant juices to make our photo emulsions. It's an old process pioneered by Sir John Herschel and Mary Somerville, who were contemporaries of Emily Dickinson, sort of at the time. And we're reproducing the pages with plants that we're both growing in our own gardens, mine in Quebec and hers in North Carolina. So there are 66 pages in her herbarium, and we're using 66 different plant emulsions. This is that page 1 that you saw. So this is strawberry emulsion. This is a marigold emulsion. And the plants that we've selected are all in the herbarium. They're also plants that she was collecting on her walks in Amherst, Massachusetts, and that were grown in the Dickinson gardens, which were quite bountiful. So while we know her today as a poet, she wasn't really known as a poet when she was alive. She only published a few poems of the 1,800 poems that she wrote. So she was known as a gardener, an avid gardener, and sort of revered for her gardening skills, and passionately involved with the whole plant life. She used to give what were called nosegays, little bouquets of flowers to people that were sick or in the neighborhood, with a little note, little poem tucked in them. So she had thriving gardens, and she had a green thumb, and more than half of her letters and a third of her poems reference plants with intimate and personal symbolism, beyond even the Victorian symbolism that plants were known for at the time. She had her own vocabulary around plants. Excuse me. So what we've really found is that this herbarium is sort of a bit of a key to understanding her larger Girls weren't permitted to study science. As we know from Anna Atkins, who went into botanical studies, they were allowed to study botany. And Emily Dickinson, in her teens, studied at Mount Hollyhock. She studied botany at Mount Hollyhock. This is a pokeweed emulsion. It's really vibrant and intense. Tiny bit about the anthotype process just shows you, we use a mortar and pestle. You crush the plant. You can use any part of the plant. We're mostly using flowers with flowers, or ferns, or leaves if it's a leaf. And you combine it with, you can Everclear vodka or lemon juice, different, you may get a bit of a different color depending on what you're using, but you coat paper several times, letting it dry in between, and then this gives you a color emulsion in what's essentially a sun bleaching process, although there's a little bit of, depending on the plant, when it bakes in the sun, there can be some different color effects happening. We're doing the washes with the brush you just saw, and we're also doing plant rubbings, which gives a really different color sometimes and intensity of color. This is a rubbing. This is an example of a geranium wash, more pastel, and the geranium rubbing here. So Dickinson's Herbarium is housed at Harvard's Houghton Library, and it's impossible to view because it's so delicate. If you turn the pages, they start falling apart. I have a long email thread recently where we had been trying to see it in person, and all these scholars were jumping on the thread, and then the answer was no, it's not possible. That different exhibitions have asked, but it's just too delicate. So what they've done is they've done an amazing job from that first slide you saw of reproducing it in their open source archives that are open to everyone to view. And we got permission to use those archives to make digital negatives to cover our anthotype emulsions. Anthotypes take a really long time to expose. I would say generally days to months. This winter, definitely months for me in New York. Finding Leah in the summer having much faster exposure times than I did, sometimes just a few hours. So it really depends on the time of year and the place that you're in. And if you're interested, now is the time to get going. So ours was always a book project, was conceived as a book project, but we did a residency at Penland Center for Arts and Crafts in January, and we just were experimenting a little bit with the print, how we would produce the prints and with different papers. So here's an example of some of them printed larger. But we do scan our anthotypes because they, like the Lumen process, are a temporal process. They fade. They even fade when you put them in dark boxes. We've noticed the color really does shift quite quickly sometimes, and sometimes not quickly at all, depending on the plant. But this project has been about Emily Dickinson, but it's also become a project about all the varied plant hues that vegetable matter produce, this incredible spectrum of stunning color. So a second part of our book is taking its cue from color nomenclatures of early geologists in the 18th century, Werner and Syme. This is Werner's nomenclature of colors. And these were classifications of colors for naturalists. Color hadn't really been classified until this point, and an effort to delineate the shimmering mess of color that exists, delineate it in categories. And they used animal, vegetable, and mineral, a little bit of language with each color. So here, number 44, I don't know if you can see, but lavender purple. The animal is described as light parts of spots of the underwings of peacock butterfly. The vegetable, dried lavender flowers. And the mineral, porcelain jasper. I just love this combination of the text with these colors. So we have this 21st century sampler that we're doing, and we're pulling together all of the research we've been doing around plant biology, native species, weeds, climate change, pollinators, gardening, medicinals, color theory, Victorian flower symbolism, all of these ways of thinking about the world of color and plants. We're sort of grouping them together with these color nomenclatures, a little bit like maybe Harper's Index, where we're going to have text in the book in a different section with these. The Color of the Grave is Green is the title from one of her poems. This is just all the greens from our anthotypes pulled together. So the Earthen Door is a line taken from one of her poems, and it alludes to her own gardens, which a door to earthen delights, as well as a door to mortality and immortality. And you'll know that Emily Dickinson was very focused in her poetry on the subject of death. So life and death, but death also. And then part of the impetus for this work for us has been to, through the anthotype process, to engage with renewable and sustainable, non-toxic darkroom practices, as well as that are in alignment with ecological concerns, as well as a focus on gardens and working from home with children for us in the pandemic. So I feel like there is a natural conversation between the Lumen work and the anthotypes, both with the fragility and temporality of the materials, and a focus on the enjoyment of process in them, as well as the way that time is really a material thematically and with long exposures and fugitive methods. So I have two last slides, and I'll bring you back to the Lumen work that I'm doing currently right now in the studio. It's not resolved, it's just work in progress. This is what's going on for me. These two images are from a new series I'm calling Spins, or my spin art. As I mentioned, I'd been meditating a lot during the pandemic, and especially recently after that strange journey inward where the child appeared with the Book of Light, which is really what photography and art are to me, a beacon in the sometimes murky darkness that surrounds us, but also in such challenging times as these, just a light shining on what we need to attend to most in the world going forward, I feel, as a culture. So after one long meditation session, after that experience, I was meditating about an hour to 2 hours a day, and I came out of it and I was curious to see what would happen if I spun a book on a piece of paper, on a piece of photographic paper. And this is the image I made, taking about 25 minutes, just spinning the book in place, which is also an image I had seen in that altered state. So I'll leave you here with this. It's an image from the past, the present, and the future. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. So I think we have time for just a few questions. I may have gone over, but if anyone has any, yes?
How do you freeze the temporal nature of the image? Are you fixing them? Or?
No, I'm not fixing them. In either case, I'm just using a scanner. The only way to fix the color is to use a scanner.
To then capture that.
To capture that point in time, the color relates to these measures of time for me, measuring time.
Does
So
the fix, like, alter the colors to a point if it's not as nice?
I wouldn't say not as nice. Many people do fix them. It's just very, very different. You would not really, you'd recognize the shape of the image, but you'd not recognize the color. Like it might be pink and it would go brown, or it might be orangey and it would go blue. So it's very different, generally. And maybe in the long, long exposures, it might retain a little bit of the color, but it does shift a lot. Yeah. Yes.
So when you're making a really long exposure, like how do you check it?
Well, like the David Mizell book, I didn't check it. I just left it there for a few weeks and then went running out as if that was going to help and grabbed it. And
The anthotype.
oh, the anthotypes?
Yeah.
So, I could go back and show that slide quickly, but they're pressed in between a piece of glass and a backing, and we have a piece of cardboard, so I unclip half of it so I can peek and I see where my exposure. I really was checking them almost every day. I had about 14 going at once, so I check the exposures. And some, it's also a process that's hard to control. They sometimes get wet or they just don't really work. They go too far. But that's how I check. Yeah. Yes?
A related question. So do you leave them out at night or do you bring them in and then bring them back out in the day?
I do bring them back in at night because who knows what will happen in the night. And when you're doing exposures that are several weeks long, they're your little babies and you just don't want anything to happen to them. So there's no reason to have them out at night because they're not going to expose. They won't get pushed any further. Yeah.
And they don't blow away because you've got them.
They're pretty heavy with the glass. Yep. They don't blow away. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Going back to your Lumen work, do you keep your originals then after they've been scanned? And also, earlier in your lecture, you had used the word fugitive to describe the Lumen process, and I was wondering what you meant by that.
Sure. I keep my original lumens in the photo envelopes that are light tight, so they don't really shift too much. But what I found is if maybe I did an exposure at the Hermitage in Florida and I do it in Brooklyn, suddenly the colors all shift. It's a bit wonky. So it will be the same color maybe 6 months later, but it won't really work in the same way. So I do keep them. They're just light tight. And then the word fugitive I use because the color, as you saw in that little video, is just shifting. I'm capturing it with photo materials, but it's not really capturable. It's in the paper, in the purest lumen process. You can't really capture the color. If you fix it, it will radically change. And so it is a fugitive process that's changing, just like the original anthotype is also fugitive because the color, you can't keep it unless you scan it. Mm-hmm. Sure. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.